The air at Giants Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey, was electric, a pulsing, living thing that seemed to vibrate through the concrete and steel of the massive arena. It was a night unlike any other, a night when the legendary Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness himself, took the stage for his No More Tours extravaganza. The crowd of 80,000 fans packed every seat, from the front-row diehards clad in black leather and studded wristbands to the nosebleed sections where the cheapest tickets had been snatched up by those who'd saved for months just to be in the same space as their idol. The stadium lights dimmed and a roar erupted, so loud it felt like the earth itself was trembling. Spotlights sliced through the darkness, catching the glint of metal jewelry and the sweat on screaming faces as the opening chords of Ozzy's set reverberated through the air. The energy was raw, primal, a shared ecstasy that only a heavy metal concert of this magnitude could ignite. Fans waved homemade signs, their scrawled messages proclaiming eternal devotion to Ozzy, while others banged their heads in rhythm, their hair flying like battle flags. The smell of beer, cigarette smoke, and anticipation hung thick in the summer night, and for those 80,000 souls, this was more than a concert. It was a pilgrimage, a chance to witness a god of rock and roll in his element. High up in section 320, row 30, seat 12, sat Emily Harper, a 20-year-old music student from Newark, New Jersey, clutching her ticket stub like it was a sacred relic. She'd scraped together every penny from her part-time job at a record store to afford the cheapest seat in the house, a perch so far from the stage that Ozzy was little more than a distant figure, his iconic black curls and manic energy reduced to a speck under the blazing lights. But for Emily, being here was everything. She didn't care about the distance or the fact that her view was partially blocked by a steel beam. She was in the same room as Ozzy Osbourne, breathing the same air, feeling the same pulse of music that had defined her life since she was a kid, sneaking listens to Blizzard of Oz on her older brother's turntable. Emily wasn't like the other fans around her, screaming and throwing devil horns with reckless abandon. She was quiet, almost invisible, her dark brown hair tucked behind her ears, her hands folded nervously in her lap. She wore a faded Black Sabbath t-shirt, one she'd found at a thrift store, and a pair of worn jeans, blending into the sea of denim and leather around her. Her friends, Sarah Coleman and Jake Miller, fellow music majors from Rutgers University, sat beside her, their excitement bubbling over as they chattered about the set list and whether Ozzy would play Paranoid tonight. Emily smiled faintly at their enthusiasm, but inside, she was a storm of emotions, thrilled to be here, yet overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all. Emily Harper was no ordinary concert-goer. Music wasn't just a passion for her. It was her entire world, the one place where she felt truly alive. Since she was a child, she'd had a gift that set her apart, though she rarely spoke of it: perfect pitch. She could hear a note and name it instantly, without a reference, as if the frequencies of the world were a language she'd been born fluent in. But more than that, Emily had an uncanny ability to hear harmonies in her mind, intricate layers of sound that wove together like threads in a tapestry. When she listened to music, she didn't just hear the melody. She heard the spaces around it, the possibilities for voices to dance together, to lift a song into something transcendent. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Newark, she'd spent hours alone in her bedroom, singing along to Ozzy's albums, not just mimicking his voice, but adding her own harmonies, creating counterpoints that felt like they'd always been meant to exist. Her parents, kind but practical, had encouraged her to pursue music as a hobby, not a career. "You're too shy for the stage, Em," her mother would say, and Emily had believed her. She was studying music education at Rutgers, dreaming of a quiet life as a high school choir teacher, where she could share her love of music without ever having to step into the spotlight. Performing for others terrified her. Her voice, though beautiful, had only ever been shared with her family and a few close friends. Yet here, in the anonymity of Giants Stadium, surrounded by strangers, she felt a strange sense of freedom, as if the music could carry her somewhere she'd never dared to go. As Ozzy strutted onto the stage, the crowd erupted into a deafening roar, a tidal wave of sound that crashed over Emily and her friends. His presence was magnetic, his voice raw and powerful as he launched into the opening number, Bark at the Moon. The guitars wailed, the drums thundered, and Ozzy's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, commanding every inch of the stadium. Emily watched, mesmerized, her heart pounding in time with the rhythm. She mouthed the lyrics silently, her lips moving in perfect sync with Ozzy's phrasing, her body swaying slightly in her seat. Sarah nudged her, grinning. "Sing, Em! No one's going to hear you up here." But Emily shook her head, her cheeks flushing. Singing in public, even in a crowd this massive, felt too exposed, too vulnerable. She was content to listen, to let Ozzy's voice wash over her like a storm. The set list rolled on, each song building the energy higher. Shot in the Dark, Mr. Crowley, War Pigs, and the crowd was a living, breathing entity, feeding off Ozzy's intensity. Emily's friends were on their feet, screaming along, but Emily stayed seated, her eyes fixed on the stage, her mind lost in the music. She could hear every layer of the sound, the screech of the lead guitar, the pulse of the bass, the growl in Ozzy's voice. And in her head, she was already weaving harmonies, imagining how she'd sing alongside him if she ever had the chance. It was a fantasy, nothing more, a private escape she'd never dare to voice aloud. Then came Crazy Train, the anthem that defined Ozzy's solo career, the song that had been the soundtrack to Emily's teenage rebellion. The opening riff hit like a lightning bolt, and the stadium exploded, fans leaping to their feet, fists pumping in the air. Ozzy's voice soared, raw and defiant, singing, "All aboard!" And the crowd echoed back, a chorus of 80,000 voices. Emily couldn't help herself. Her lips parted, and she began to sing, softly at first, her voice barely audible over the roar of the crowd. But as the song built, something shifted inside her. The music was too powerful, too consuming to stay silent. She closed her eyes, letting the melody pull her in, and without thinking, she began to sing harmony. Not just any harmony, but a complex, intuitive counterpoint that wove around Ozzy's lead vocal like a shadow, enhancing it without overpowering it. Her voice was clear, pure, with a strength she didn't know she possessed, and it carried in a way that defied the chaos around her. The acoustics of Giants Stadium, with its towering speakers and carefully engineered sound design, seemed to amplify her voice, sending it dancing through the air. Sarah and Jake froze, staring at her in awe. "Em, what the hell?" Jake whispered, his eyes wide. "That's insane!" But Emily didn't hear him. She was lost in the music, her voice blending with Ozzy's in a way that felt like destiny, like she was meant to be part of this moment. On stage, Ozzy was in his element, stalking the edge of the platform, his eyes wild with energy as he belted out the chorus of Crazy Train. The band was tight, the guitars screaming, the drums driving the song forward like a runaway freight train. But halfway through the second verse, something caught Ozzy's attention. His head tilted slightly, his brow furrowing as he picked up a sound that shouldn't have been there. A harmony, rich and precise, weaving through his vocal like it had been rehearsed for months. At first, he thought it was one of his backing vocalists, but he glanced at them and saw they were singing their usual parts, not this intricate, almost otherworldly accompaniment. He paused, missing a beat, his eyes scanning the crowd. The band played on, but Ozzy's focus was elsewhere, his ears straining to catch the source of this mysterious voice. It was live, he was sure of it. Not a backing track, not a glitch in the sound system, but a real human voice, singing with a clarity and musicality that sent a shiver down his spine. He'd been performing for decades, had heard every kind of fan scream and sing-along, but this was different. This was something extraordinary, something that demanded his attention. Emily, oblivious to the effect she was having, kept singing, her voice growing bolder as the song reached its bridge. She wasn't just following Ozzy's melody. She was creating something new, a harmony that seemed to lift the song into a new dimension. Her friends were now openly staring, their mouths agape, as if they were seeing her for the first time. The fans around them, caught up in the frenzy of the concert, didn't notice, but Emily's voice was carrying, cutting through the noise in a way that seemed almost supernatural. Up on stage, Ozzy's confusion turned to determination. He raised a hand, signaling the band to stop, and the music cut off abruptly, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. The crowd, caught off guard, murmured in confusion, their cheers fading into a low buzz. Ozzy stepped to the edge of the stage, his microphone clutched tightly, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. "All right, listen up," he said, his Birmingham accent thick, his voice carrying a mix of awe and urgency. "There's someone out there singing like a bloody angel in a thunderstorm. And I need to find you. Whoever you are, you're making Crazy Train sound better than I ever have. Sing again. Let me hear you." The stadium erupted in a mix of cheers and gasps, the energy shifting from wild abandon to electric anticipation. Something incredible was about to happen, and everyone could feel it. Emily's heart stopped. Her voice caught in her throat, and she shrank back in her seat, her hands trembling. There was no way Ozzy Osbourne, the god of heavy metal, was talking about her. She was nobody, just a shy girl from Newark with a cheap ticket and a head full of dreams. Sarah grabbed her arm, her eyes wide with excitement. "Em, it's you! He heard you! You were singing that harmony!" Jake nodded furiously, practically shoving her out of her seat. "Come on, Em, don't choke now. Sing!" But Emily shook her head, her face pale, her breath coming in short gasps. The idea of standing up, of drawing attention to herself in front of 80,000 people, was paralyzing. She'd spent her whole life avoiding the spotlight, content to let her voice live in the safety of her own mind. But down on the stage, Ozzy wasn't giving up. He paced back and forth, his eyes searching the crowd, his voice booming through the speakers. "Come on, don't be shy. You've got a gift, and I want to hear it again. Sing Crazy Train, just a few lines so I can find you." The crowd fell silent, 80,000 pairs of eyes scanning their neighbors, waiting for someone to step forward. Emily felt the weight of that silence, the pressure of every gaze, and for a moment, she thought she might faint. But deep inside, something stirred. A spark of courage, a whisper of the music that had always been her refuge. Could she do this? Could she let her voice be heard, not just in her head, but in the world? The moment hung in the balance, and Giant Stadium held its breath. The silence in Giant Stadium was deafening, a surreal pause that hung over the 80,000 fans like a storm cloud ready to burst. Ozzy Osbourne stood at the edge of the stage, his black leather jacket glinting under the spotlights, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the sea of faces stretching into the darkness. His voice, still raw from belting out Crazy Train, echoed through the massive sound system, carrying a mix of curiosity and insistence. "I know you're out there," he said, his Birmingham accent cutting through the hush like a blade. "That voice, that bloody perfect harmony. It's not one of my singers, and it's not a damn recording. Someone in this crowd is singing like they were born for this stage, and I'm not moving on till I find you." The crowd buzzed, a low hum of excitement and confusion rippling through the stands. Fans craned their necks, whispering to each other, trying to figure out who could have caught the attention of the Prince of Darkness himself. Some shouted encouragements, others laughed nervously, but all eyes were searching, waiting for the mystery singer to reveal themselves. The air crackled with anticipation, the kind of electric tension that only comes when history is about to be made. High up in section 320, row 30, seat 12, Emily Harper felt like the world was closing in on her. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst, her palms slick with sweat as she gripped the armrests of her chair. The faded Black Sabbath t-shirt she wore clung to her skin, and her breath came in shallow, panicked gasps. Ozzy Osbourne, the man whose music had been her lifeline through lonely nights and tough days, was talking about her. It couldn't be real. There were 80,000 people in this stadium, many of them screaming, singing, shouting along to Crazy Train. Surely he'd heard someone else, someone closer to the stage, someone with a microphone, someone who wasn't a nobody from Newark sitting in the cheapest seats money could buy. Her friends, Sarah Coleman and Jake Miller, were practically vibrating with excitement beside her. Sarah's eyes were wide, her hands clamped on Emily's shoulders, shaking her gently. "Em, it's you. He's talking about you. You were singing that harmony, and he heard it." Jake, usually the laid-back one, was leaning forward, his voice urgent. "Come on, Em. You gotta stand up. This is your shot." But Emily shook her head, her brown hair falling over her face like a curtain she could hide behind. "No way," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not me. It can't be. I'm too far away. He didn't hear me." But Ozzy wasn't backing down. He paced the stage, his boots thudding against the platform, his microphone swinging like a weapon. "Don't make me beg," he said, a grin creeping into his voice, though his eyes were serious, almost desperate. "I've been doing this a long time, and I know when I hear something special. Whoever you are, you're singing like you're part of the bloody band. Sing a few lines of Crazy Train. Let's hear it." The crowd roared in approval, the sound swelling like a tidal wave, urging the mystery singer to come forward. Some fans started chanting, "Sing! Sing! Sing!" their voices merging into a rhythmic pulse that echoed through the stadium. Emily sank lower in her seat, her mind racing. She'd always been the quiet one, the girl who faded into the background, who sang in her bedroom with the door closed, who dreamed of music but never dared to chase it. Performing in front of her Rutgers music class was terrifying enough. 80,000 people? That was unthinkable. Yet deep down she knew Sarah and Jake were right. She had been singing harmony, not just following Ozzy's melody, but weaving something new, something that felt like it belonged to the song. And somehow, impossibly, Ozzy had heard it. Sarah wasn't letting up. She grabbed Emily's hand, her nails digging in slightly, her voice fierce. "Emily Harper, you are not chickening out on this. You've been singing Ozzy's songs since we were kids, and you're better than half the people on that stage. Stand up and sing, or I swear I'll drag you up myself." Jake nodded, his grin wide, but his eyes serious. "She's not kidding, Em. This is Ozzy freaking Osbourne. When's this gonna happen again?" Emily's stomach churned, her mind a whirlwind of fear and doubt. What if she stood up and made a fool of herself? What if her voice cracked? Or worse, what if Ozzy realized he'd made a mistake? But then she thought of the music, of the way Crazy Train had felt pouring out of her, the way her harmony had locked into Ozzy's voice like a key in a lock. For the first time in her life, she'd felt like her voice wasn't just a private escape. It was something bigger, something that could reach beyond her. She closed her eyes, took a shaky breath, and whispered, "Okay." The stadium was still buzzing, the crowd's anticipation growing with every second Ozzy waited. He leaned forward, one hand shielding his eyes from the spotlights, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Come on, mate. Don't leave me hanging. Just a few lines. That's all I need." Emily felt Sarah and Jake's hands on her back, pushing her gently but firmly to her feet. Her legs wobbled as she stood, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure the people around her could hear it. The fans in Section 320 turned to look, their faces a mix of curiosity and excitement, some whispering, "Is that her?" Emily's throat tightened, but she forced herself to focus on the music, on the song that had always been her anthem. She opened her mouth, and in a voice clearer and stronger than she thought possible, she sang, "All aboard, ha 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 ha." The opening lines of Crazy Train rang out, her harmony weaving around the melody she knew by heart, her tone pure and steady, carrying through the stadium's acoustics like it was meant to be there. The effect was instantaneous. The crowd around her gasped, then erupted into cheers, their voices rising like a wave. Down on the stage, Ozzy's face lit up, his trademark wild grin spreading as he pointed toward the upper deck. "There you are!" he shouted, his voice booming through the speakers. "Bloody hell, that's the one! Where are you? Section what?" The stadium's sound engineers, quick on their feet, activated the crowd microphones near Section 320, amplifying Emily's voice even further. She kept singing, her voice growing bolder with each note, the harmony she'd crafted blending perfectly with the memory of Ozzy's lead. The fans around her were screaming now, clapping and stomping, some reaching out to pat her shoulder as if she were already a star. Sarah was crying, her hands pressed to her face, while Jake pumped his fist in the air, yelling, "That's my girl!" Emily felt like she was floating, her fear melting away as the music took over, her voice soaring in a way she'd never let it before. Ozzy was practically bouncing on the stage, his energy infectious. "Right, you lot, help me out," he called to the crowd. "Point me to that voice." Fans in Section 320 started waving their arms, some holding up lighters, creating a sea of flickering lights that drew Ozzy's attention to the upper deck. He squinted, then laughed, a raw, joyous sound. "You're way the hell up there, aren't you? Don't move, we're coming for you." He turned to the side of the stage, gesturing to the security team. "Get someone up there, bring 'em down. I want to meet this angel of rock and roll." The crowd roared, the chant of "Sing, sing!" morphing into something new, a rhythmic call of "Mystery singer, mystery singer." Emily's knees buckled, and she grabbed the back of her seat for support, her mind reeling. This was really happening. Ozzy Osbourne was sending security to find her, to bring her to the stage. She looked at Sarah, her eyes wide with panic. "What do I do?" she whispered. Sarah grabbed her hand, squeezing hard. "You go down there and show the world what you've got. That's what." The security team moved quickly, their radios crackling as they navigated the crowded concourses of Giants Stadium. Fans parted like the Red Sea, cheering and clapping as the guards made their way to Section 320. Emily stood frozen, her heart racing as a burly security guard in a yellow jacket approached, his face serious but kind. "You, the one singing?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the crowd. Emily nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with nerves. "All right, let's go. Ozzy wants you on stage." The fans around her erupted, some reaching out to high-five her as she was led away. Sarah and Jake trailing behind, shouting encouragements. The journey down the stadium's winding ramps felt like a dream, the cheers of the crowd echoing in her ears, the lights flashing overhead. Emily's mind was a blur, her thoughts racing between terror and exhilaration. She was nobody, just a kid from Newark who loved music. How was she here, being escorted to the stage of Giants Stadium to meet Ozzy Osbourne? As they reached the lower levels, the roar of the crowd grew louder, the energy palpable. Ozzy kept the audience engaged, telling stories of his early days with Black Sabbath, his voice warm and teasing as he stalled for time. "I've heard a lot of voices in my life," he said, pacing the stage, "but this one's got something special. You lot feel it, don't you?" The crowd screamed in agreement, their anticipation building with every second. Emily emerged from the tunnel, her eyes wide as she saw the stage up close for the first time, the massive screens overhead, the band waiting in the wings. Ozzy turned as the security guard led her forward, his grin widening. "There she is," he shouted, holding out a hand. The crowd exploded, the sound shaking the stadium to its core. Emily stepped into the spotlight, her legs trembling, her heart pounding. But something in Ozzy's eyes, wild, kind, and utterly fearless, gave her a spark of courage. This was her moment, and whatever happened next, she knew it would change her life forever. The roar of 80,000 fans at Giants Stadium felt like a tidal wave crashing over Emily Harper as she stepped onto the stage, her sneakers squeaking against the polished platform. The spotlights were blinding, their heat pressing against her skin, and the massive screens overhead magnified her every movement. Her wide-eyed expression broadcast to every corner of the arena. She was trembling, her hands clenched into fists. Her faded Black Sabbath t-shirt and worn jeans, a stark contrast to Ozzy Osbourne's glittering leather ensemble. The Prince of Darkness stood just a few feet away, his wild grin and outstretched hand anchoring her in the surreal moment. The crowd's cheers were deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to lift her off the ground, but Emily's world had narrowed to the man in front of her, his eyes gleaming with a mix of mischief and genuine excitement. "Welcome to the madhouse, love," Ozzy said, his voice warm through the microphone, sparking another eruption from the crowd. "What's your name?" Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry as she leaned toward the mic he held out. "Emily Harper," she managed, her voice small but clear, amplified by the stadium's sound system. The fans roared again, chanting, "Emily! Emily!" as if she were already one of their own. Ozzy laughed, a raw, infectious sound, and clapped a hand on her shoulder. "Emily Harper, you've got a voice that's got this whole bloody place shook up. You ready to sing with me?" Her heart pounded, but she nodded, her fear battling with a spark of courage she didn't know she had. Ozzy turned to the crowd, raising his arms like a conductor summoning a storm. "All right, you lot, let's give Emily a proper welcome. We're gonna do Crazy Train again, and this time she's part of the band." The audience exploded, their cheers shaking the stadium's steel rafters, lighters and fists raised high in the air. The band, guitarist Zakk Wylde, bassist Mike Inez, drummer Randy Castillo, and keyboardist Kevin Jones, grinned from their positions, clearly caught up in the moment's magic. Zakk struck the opening riff of Crazy Train, the iconic notes slicing through the air like a battle cry. and the drums kicked in, driving the song forward with relentless energy. Emily stood frozen for a split second, her mind screaming that this couldn't be real. She was just a 20-year-old music student from Newark, not a rock star. But Ozzy's presence was magnetic, pulling her into the music. He leaned close, his voice low but firm, not broadcast through the mic. "Just feel it, Emily. Follow me, and let that voice of yours fly. You belong here." His words were like a lifeline, cutting through her panic, and she nodded, her eyes locking onto his. As Ozzy launched into the first verse, his voice raw and commanding, Emily took a deep breath and began to sing. She didn't try to mimic him or overpower him. Instead, she wove her harmony around his lead, her clear, soaring tone blending with his gritty intensity. The harmony she'd sung instinctively from the stands came back to her, but now it was bolder, more confident, as if the stage itself was amplifying her courage. The crowd felt it too, their cheers shifting to a hushed awe as the two voices intertwined, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. Emily's harmony wasn't just a background layer, it was a conversation, a musical dance that lifted Ozzy's performance to new heights. During the chorus, when Ozzy belted out, "I'm going off the rails on a crazy train," Emily added a counterpoint, her voice climbing in a way that echoed the song's wild energy without stepping on its lead. The band noticed, their grins widening as they leaned into the groove, Zach's guitar solo screaming with extra fire, as if inspired by the unexpected magic unfolding. Emily's fear began to melt away, replaced by a rush of adrenaline and joy. She'd never sung like this before. Not in her bedroom, not in her Rutgers music classes, not even in her wildest dreams. The stage felt alive beneath her, the crowd's energy feeding her, and Ozzy's encouragement was a constant anchor. During an instrumental break, he leaned over again, his eyes sparkling. "You're killing it, love. Keep going. Add some flair." Emboldened, Emily began to experiment, adding subtle vocal runs that danced around Ozzy's phrasing, her voice weaving in and out like a second guitar. The crowd was on its feet, screaming, some fans holding up camcorders and cassette recorders, capturing the moment in grainy VHS and muffled audio that would soon become legend. Sarah and Jake, watching from the side of the stage where security had brought them, were jumping up and down, Sarah's tears mixing with her laughter as she shouted, "That's our M!" Jake pumped his fist, his voice lost in the roar, but his pride unmistakable. Ozzy was in his element, feeding off Emily's energy as much as she fed off his. He danced across the stage, his movements wild and theatrical, but he kept returning to her, locking eyes as they sang, creating a connection that felt like they'd been performing together for years. During the bridge, he gave her a nod, signaling her to take the lead for a few lines. Emily's heart skipped, but she didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her voice ringing out, "Mental wounds not healing. Who and what's to blame?" Her tone was haunting, pure, carrying a depth of emotion that silenced the crowd for a moment before they erupted again, their cheers shaking the stadium. Ozzy clapped, laughing into the mic. "Bloody hell, Emily, you're stealing my show!" The crowd roared with laughter and approval. And Emily felt a smile break across her face, her fear replaced by a sense of belonging she'd never known. She wasn't just singing with Ozzy Osbourne, she was performing, her voice a force that held its own against a legend. The song built to its climax, the guitars and drums thundering, Ozzy and Emily trading lines and harmonies in a way that felt effortless, almost fated. As the final notes rang out, Ozzy threw his arm around Emily's shoulders, pulling her to the center of the stage. "Giant Stadium, give it up for Emily Harper. he shouted, and the crowd's response was seismic, a roar that seemed to shake the very foundation of the arena. Emily stood there, breathless, her eyes wide as she took in the sea of faces, the lighters, the signs, the love pouring toward her. She felt like she was floating, her body light with the thrill of what she'd just done. Ozzy leaned close, his voice soft again. "You did good, kid. You've got something special." He turned back to the crowd, raising her hand like a champion. "This is what music's about, yeah? Finding the magic in the chaos." The fans screamed their agreement, and Emily felt tears prick her eyes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that she'd just lived a moment she'd never forget. As the cheers continued, the band launched into the next song, but Ozzy kept Emily on stage for a moment longer, letting her soak in the crowd's adoration. The giant screens showed her face, her shy smile transforming into something radiant, and the fans ate it up, chanting her name between songs. Backstage, the crew was buzzing, sound engineers and roadies exchanging looks of disbelief at what they'd just witnessed. Fans with camcorders kept recording, their tapes destined to be copied and shared among music lovers, bootlegs that would spread Emily's voice far beyond Giants Stadium. Sarah and Jake were escorted backstage, where they waited for Emily, their excitement barely contained. When she finally stepped off the stage, guided by a security guard, they rushed to her, enveloping her in a group hug. "You were incredible," Sarah sobbed, her mascara smudged. Jake just shook his head, grinning. "Em, you just sang with Ozzy Osbourne. You're a freaking rock star." Emily was still trembling, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She'd been terrified, certain she'd freeze or fail, but something about Ozzy's faith in her, the crowd's energy, and the music itself had carried her through. She felt different now, like a door had opened inside her, one she hadn't even known was there. Ozzy joined them backstage a few minutes later, his energy still high, his grin wide. "Emily, you're a bloody natural," he said, clapping her on the back. "Where'd you learn to sing like that?" She blushed, stumbling over her words. "Just in my room, listening to your albums. I've always loved your music." Ozzy laughed, his eyes crinkling. "Well, your room's got some serious talent then. Stick around after the show, yeah? We need to talk." He winked and headed back to the stage, leaving Emily stunned, her friends squealing with excitement. The concert continued, but for Emily, the world had shifted. She'd stepped out of the shadows, and there was no going back. Backstage at Giants Stadium, the air was thick with the scent of sweat, cigarette smoke, and the lingering buzz of a concert that had just rewritten history. Emily Harper stood in a dimly lit corridor, her heart still racing from the electrifying duet with Ozzy Osbourne that had left 80,000 fans in a frenzy. Her faded Black Sabbath t-shirt was damp with nervous sweat, her brown hair slightly mussed from the chaos of the stage, but her eyes shone with a new kind of light, a mix of disbelief, joy, and something deeper, a spark of self-belief she'd never felt before. Her friends, Sarah Coleman and Jake Miller, flanked her, their faces glowing with pride and excitement, their voices overlapping as they recounted every second of her performance. "Em, you were unreal out there," Sarah said, her hands gesturing wildly. "You made Ozzy sound even better. And that's saying something." Jake, usually the quieter of the two, couldn't stop grinning. "I mean, you were up there with the Prince of Darkness, holding your own. That's going to be in every fanzine from here to London." Emily managed a shaky smile, her mind still reeling. She'd just sung Crazy Train with Ozzy Osbourne in front of 80,000 people. How was this her life? The weight of the moment was sinking in, but so was a quiet realization. She'd faced her deepest fear, and instead of crumbling, she'd soared. The door to the backstage lounge swung open, and Ozzy himself strode in, his leather jacket slung over one shoulder, his wild energy undimmed by the hours he'd spent commanding the stage. The crew parted for him, their faces a mix of awe and familiarity. But Ozzy's focus was on Emily. "There's my mystery singer," he said, his Birmingham accent thick, his grin as infectious as ever. He clapped a hand on her shoulder, his rings glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Emily Harper, you've got a voice that could wake the dead. Where have you been hiding it?" Emily blushed, her words stumbling out. "Just in Newark, I guess. In my bedroom, singing along to your records." Ozzy laughed, a raw, joyous sound that filled the room. "Bloody hell, love. If that's what comes out of your bedroom, I need to visit Newark." The crew chuckled, and Emily felt a warmth spread through her, easing the knot of nerves in her chest. Ozzy gestured for her to sit, pulling up a chair across from her, his demeanor shifting from rock god to something more human, more grounded. "All right, serious talk," he said, leaning forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "You've got something special, Emily. Not just talent, heart. That's what makes a real musician. You ever thought about doing this for real?" Emily's breath caught. The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. She'd dreamed of a life in music, but always as something distant, unattainable, a fantasy for someone braver, someone with connections and confidence she didn't have. "I've thought about it," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm too shy. I'm studying to be a music teacher, to stay behind the scenes." Ozzy raised an eyebrow, his expression a mix of surprise and amusement. "Shy? You just sang in front of 80,000 people and made 'em lose their minds. That's not shy, love. That's a bloody superstar waiting to happen." He leaned back, his tone turning thoughtful. "Look, I've been where you are, scared, unsure, thinking the world's too big for you. But music? It's bigger than fear. And you've got it in you to go all the way. What if I told you I could help? Coaches, studios, a chance to record with my team. Would you take it?" Emily's eyes widened, her heart pounding. "You're serious?" Ozzy nodded, his grin returning. "As a heart attack. Stick around, yeah? Let's see where this voice of yours can go." That conversation marked the beginning of a journey Emily could never have imagined. Over the next few months, Ozzy made good on his promise. He connected Emily with his vocal coaches and performance mentors, professionals who'd worked with some of the biggest names in rock. They saw in her what Ozzy had, a raw, natural talent that needed only guidance to shine. Emily spent hours in studios, learning to channel her shyness into stage presence, to trust her voice in ways she'd never dared. Her first big break came when Ozzy invited her to record backing vocals for his next album, No More Tears. Her harmonies, layered into tracks like Mama, I'm Coming Home, added a haunting depth that fans and critics alike raved about. But it wasn't just the recording sessions that changed her. It was the way Ozzy treated her, like an equal, a collaborator, not just a fan he'd plucked from the crowd. He'd check in during rehearsals, offering pointers with a mix of tough love and encouragement. "Don't hold back, Emily," he'd say, pacing the studio. "Your voice is a weapon. Use it." And slowly, she did. The girl who'd once been too terrified to sing in front of her music class was now performing in studios, her confidence growing with every note. Word of the Giants' stadium duet spread like wildfire. Even in an era before the internet, Fans who'd recorded the concert on camcorders and cassette decks shared their bootlegs, grainy VHS tapes and muffled audio tapes circulating through music shops, fan clubs, and underground networks. Radio DJs got hold of the recordings, playing clips and marveling at the mystery singer who'd matched Ozzy note for note. "This is what live music is about," one DJ said on air, his voice crackling with excitement. "A nobody from the nosebleeds stealing the show with the Prince of Darkness." Music executives took notice, and soon Emily was fielding offers, recording contracts, session work, even songwriting gigs. By the time No More Tears dropped, Emily's name was known, not just as the girl from Giant Stadium, but as a rising star in her own right. She released her debut album a year later, a blend of heavy metal and soulful ballads that showcased her voice and her knack for crafting harmonies. The album went platinum, driven by the buzz of her story and the raw emotion in her music. Fans called her Ozzy's Angel, a nickname she embraced with a shy smile. But success didn't change Emily's core. She remained the quiet girl from Newark, grounded by her roots and her love for music. She never forgot the fear she'd felt in Section 320, the moment when she'd almost let her chance slip away. That memory drove her to give back, to ensure others didn't let fear silence their voices. Inspired by her journey, Emily founded the Starlight Voices Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing scholarships and performance opportunities for young musicians from underserved communities. She spent weekends visiting schools, hosting workshops where she'd listen to nervous kids sing, offering the same encouragement Ozzy had given her. "You don't need a big stage to be heard," she'd tell them, her voice soft but firm. "Just sing, wherever you are. Someone's always listening." The foundation grew, funding music programs and sending kids to summer camps where they could discover their own talents. For Emily, it was a way to honor the moment that had changed her life, to pass on the courage Ozzy had helped her find. Years later, Emily stood on the stage of MetLife Stadium, which had replaced Giants Stadium, headlining her own show. The crowd was smaller than Ozzy's, 50,000, still a sea of faces, but the energy was just as electric. She wore a black leather jacket now, a nod to her mentor, but her smile was still the same shy one from that night in Section 320. Before launching into her final song, she paused, holding the microphone close, her eyes scanning the crowd. "This place means everything to me," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "A long time ago, I was just a kid in the nosebleeds, too scared to let my voice out. But someone heard me. Someone believed in me. And that's why I'm here. Why I'll always believe in you. So tonight, sing with me, wherever you're sitting. Let the world hear you." The crowd roared, and as she launched into a cover of Crazy Train, thousands of voices joined her, a chorus of dreamers who'd been inspired by her story. Backstage, a plaque on the wall commemorated that night at Giants Stadium, its words simple but profound. "In memory of the magic when artists listen to their audience." Emily glanced at it as she left the stage, her heart full. She'd learned that music wasn't just about performing, it was about connection, about lifting others up, about finding the courage to sing, no matter how big the crowd or how quiet the voice. And somewhere, she knew, Ozzy was grinning, proud of the angel he'd found in the chaos.